10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 322. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 322 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Welcome back in, and if you're new to the show, welcome. Really happy to have you here, and we hope to be a useful resource on your jazz education journey. So today we're going to start a new series, and we're going to start something new on the podcast where we're going to take a look at, in depth, certain artists playing and try to come up with some characteristics of that playing that makes it so great and show you how you can use these characteristics in your own playing and build your vocabulary and in general just make yourself sound better. Really going to learn what makes these artists tick. So the first person we're going to take a look at, the Architect of Bebop, one of the greatest musicians in history, Charlie Parker. But before we get into that, just wanted to remind you that this is a listener-supported show, which means we don't have ads on the podcast except for this short one. And instead, we rely on listeners just like you to donate a small amount of money each and every month to keep this going. We do that through the Patreon platform. Now, you can find that by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up today. You do get a PDF and audio examples with every single episode that we've ever done. So there's a lot of jazz material over there for you to educate yourself with. Wanted to give a quick shout out to some brand new patrons this week. Thank you to our new $5 patrons, Tyler, Vicky, and Anton. And thank you to our new $3 patrons, Brendan, Miguel, and David. And of course, to everybody that's been supporting this show for weeks, months, and years, thank you. We could not do this without you. So again, it's 10minutejazzlesson.com. Click on one of the Patreon banners and get yourself signed up today. All right, so let's dive into the episode. So we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of aspects of Charlie Parker's playing. And as most of you know, Charlie Parker is really the architect of modern jazz. He was the one that basically invented bebop. And we all know that bebop had a huge, massive, outsized influence on everything that came after it. It really changed the music. So a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about in this series about Charlie Parker, you're really going to hear this in the playing of just about everybody that came after him. There's really no way to escape the influence of Charlie Parker. So when I was thinking about starting to do these series on these giants of the music, it really made sense to start with Bird and go from there. Because if we start by talking about Charlie Parker, really the people that we're going to talk about that came after him are going to be 100% influenced by him. So it makes sense to start here. All right, so what we're going to look at today is Charlie Parker's use of the 16th Note Triplet. Now, Charlie Parker uses the 16th Note Triplet in a lot of different ways in his music. We're going to talk about one specific way that he uses it and how you can start to use this in your own playing. I highly suggest that you have a copy of the Omnibook if you're a jazz musician at all. If you don't have that, go out and get it, right? It's available absolutely everywhere. And this is really one of the most important documentations of any jazz player's work. It has most of his recorded solos, and it is an absolute treasure trove of material for you to study and listen to and steal from and all that good stuff. So when we talk about these aspects of his playing, we're obviously only going to use a couple of examples, but I want you to be able to have everything that Charlie Parker recorded all written out and have that as a study guide. So get the Omnibook. That's something that's essential for every jazz student's life. library. Okay, so back to what we were talking about. So the 16th note triplet. Now here's the way that we are going to study it. Charlie Parker has this one specific way of putting 16th note triplets in his lines where they kind of interrupt what would have been just a plain old 8th note line. And he has this way of interjecting with a 16th note triplet that really livens up the phrase that he's playing. It adds a lot of interest to what would have previously been just a plain old 8th note phrase. So take out your PDF for this episode, and what I want to do is I want to play example 1 and example 2 for you so that you can hear 2 lines that come straight from Bird's playing. And then when we look at example 3 and example 4, I'm going to show you how you can actually insert some of these 16th note triplets into your lines to make them more interesting. So here is example 1. So what you can see in example number 1 is on beat 3, Bird uses a 16th note triplet, right? And then he continues on with his 8th note lines. In fact, this line is made up of all 8th notes except for that one 16th note triplet on beat 3. So now let's take a look at example number 2. Now again, what we see here is actually we see a 16th note triplet on beat 3 again, right? And again, we see all the other notes in the line are all 8th notes, but then he interjects with this 16th note triplet. So let's look at the similarities between both of these lines when it comes to how he uses this 16th note triplet. So what you'll see is that he always starts the triplet and ends the triplet on the same note. So in example number 1, he starts the 16th note triplet on a concert G, and then he ends the 16th note triplet on that concert G. Now, what's in the middle? A concert A. So he's using an upper neighbor tone, which is a whole step above that concert G, and then he's coming back to the note that he started on. Now, if we look at example number 2, he's doing kind of exactly the same thing. This time he starts the triplet on a concert A and ends the triplet on a concert A, and in between is a concert B flat. So it is still an upper neighbor tone, but this time it's a half step above the note that he started on. Okay, but look at the similarities between the two, right? They're almost exactly the same, just utilizing different starting notes. So now we come to how we can start using these 16th note triplets in our lines. So if we take what I just said, where you're going to interject your 8th note line with a 16th note triplet wherever you think it will sound good. And what you're going to do is you're going to start that 16th note triplet on a particular note. Then you're going to go up to a neighbor tone above it, whether that be a whole step or a half step, whatever works with the harmony. Then you're going to come back to the note you started the 16th note triplet on. Now this makes it really, really easy to actually modify our lines to use 16th note triplets. So let's look at example number 3. And this is a straight up 2-5-1 with all 8th notes that I wrote. So let's check out example 3 without any triplets. So a pretty standard 8th note 2-5-1 lick. Now I want you to look at the next line on your PDF, which is example number 3 with triplets. So what I've done is I've identified 3 different places where I can use this formula, okay? And what I've done is I've taken the note that I would have used on that beat anyway, and I've put this formula in there. So I'm starting on the note that I would have used in the 8th note line, going up to the upper neighbor tone of that note, coming back to that note, and then just continuing on with the line exactly as it was before. So I've done it in 3 places, and this might be a really heavy use of it, but it's to prove a point here. So in the first bar, I've used it on beat 2. In the second bar, I've used it on beat 2. And in the third bar, I've used it on beat 2. So all I've done is replace an 8th note with a 16th note triplet. It's not very difficult to do this and to put this into your existing lines. So let's check out example number 3 with the added 16th note triplets. So you could hear it adds a lot of dimension to the line. It adds a lot of rhythmic interest, and it is really something that I think Charlie Parker does that makes his music just sound so much more interesting. It adds that little bit of pizzazz to an otherwise plain old 8th note line. So let's check out the 2 lines back to back. I'll play it first without the triplets and then with the triplets, and you'll hear what it adds to the lick. So I think it's a lot more interesting. And remember, it wasn't that hard. All I did was I went through my 8th note line and I figured out a couple of places that I can insert that formula. Keep the 8th note that you were playing, go up to the neighbor tone above it, come back to the note that you were playing in the first place. So let's check out one more example. So this is example number 4, and I've done the exact same thing. What you're going to notice is in the original example, it is all 8th notes. And in the second example, I've replaced beat 1 with a 16th note triplet. And then in the second measure, I've replaced beat 2 with a 16th note triplet in exactly the same fashion as I did before. So again, same formula. All right, so what you want to do is maybe go back through some 2-5-1 licks that you have written or that you've transcribed that happen to be all 8th notes and try this. Figure out a good place to put a 16th note triplet where it will sound good, okay? And then use that formula. Take the 8th note that you were going to play. You're going to play that note, go up to the neighbor tone above it, come back to the starting note, and then just continue on with your 8th note line. And the beautiful thing about this is that you could do it as much or as little as you want. Whatever you think sounds good, use that. Charlie Parker uses it a lot, but typically in, let's say, a 3-measure phrase, he'll use it once or twice. Okay. But again, this requires going back to Charlie Parker's music and really studying it a little bit more than what I can present to you here in 10 minutes. All right, well, hopefully you enjoyed the first part in our series. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at his use of enclosures, another huge part of his playing. Let me know if you have any questions, and remember, if you want to get the PDF to this episode and every single episode that we've ever done, support the show, make sure it keeps coming out, and get a lot of jazz education materials in return. You can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, and get yourself signed up today for instant access to all that stuff. As always, hope everybody's doing well out there, staying safe and healthy, and we will talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.